everybody. Welcome to Locker Room. This is Southwest Podcast for Men, where we redeem men's conversations, talk about the right things in the right ways. My name is Scott Hatfield, and so glad that you're checking out the podcast. Today, we're gonna jump into another round of an important topic, and I'm excited about our guest. He oversees our student ministries team. Last week, we talked about just the hard season that he's been in and even are currently in with infertility. And if this is something that you struggle with or know someone who does, please check out the podcast from last week or share it. Hope that's encouraging to know that you're not alone. I hope that it's helpful for the people in your life. And he's like the 90s Bulls. He's back to back 2 weeks in a row, man. Locker Room, welcome Eric Schneider. Did you like that one?
I did, man.
Were you alive then? What year
yeah,
were you
dude.
born?
There's this picture of me and my family on a ski trip when I was in elementary school. I had the Bulls starter jacket.
Did you?
I was on the back half.
Okay.
It was. I think I really started paying attention, following the Bulls when it was like the 95, 96, 97, that last stretch of it a little bit. So I'm happy to be here. I can be the Bill Winnington.
The white guy.
The white guy waving the towel on the end of the bench on that team.
That's right.
So I'm happy to be here.
Hey, we have a number of things in common. We love to laugh. We've already laughed a bunch today, even though
Yes.
that last episode was hard. It's fun laughing with you. We can't tell some of these stories, but anyway, we've had some fun stories. God's been good, even just with our student ministry stuff together. It's fun. We have a heart for this generation. God is just moving in them all over the place, in our churches and colleges right now, campuses, lots of places. We have a heart for men to follow Jesus and lead out. We both have been fans of Kansas City Royals. I'm probably much less of a fan of the Royals than what you've been. You've been a lifelong fan, right?
Yeah.
Whole life.
Yeah. I grew up in Kansas, talked about that last time, and actually grew up in Wichita, where for a long time the Royals had their AA team. Yeah. So I got to kind of like go watch and then start to pick up on, these guys get better and then go play for the pro team.
How about that?
And stuff like that. But then like when I went to college, we were like 2 hours away from Kansas City, and I had friends that they'd grown up in Kansas City, so they went to Kaufman all the time for games and stuff. And so it was a lot of weekends, honestly, during like the end and like the beginning of the season when we were in school and stuff, where we would just drive over, we'd scalp like a $5 ticket in the parking lot, which was way up in the nosebleeds, but because nobody was going, we had like a
Royals
system.
Was terrible for a long time, so there was never a problem about getting tickets.
So
cheap
bad.
Tickets too. Yeah.
But yeah, we'd usually like inning by inning just move down further and further, and then we'd be right on the dugout by the 7th inning stretch. You know,
in the bench. You guys let me pitch hit it for a little bit.
I'm no pro, but I might be able to do better than what's happening on the
right.
field, because they were really bad for a really long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved that. And then out of college, went and started in ministry in Arizona, in Phoenix, and so spring training was huge out there.
Yeah, it's true.
So on my days off, like Candace would be working, but I'd go out to spring training games by myself,
fun,
or I'd take friends and stuff every once in a while. But I'd love just going out and watching those guys play, even in the prep to that. But they didn't get good till I moved here.
Yeah.
They got good when I moved here, and so actually in 2014 was my first year here. That's when they made it back to the World Series for the first time in like 30 years. And so one of my really good friends, we had just gone to games together all through college. He was living in California at the time I was living here. We got tickets to Game 1 of the 2014 series, which they lost that one.
Did they win in 15?
They won in 15.
Yeah, that's right.
But my mindset was, I've been a Royals fan my whole life. They've never been close. Now they get to the World Series. First year they're in the playoffs in my whole life.
Yeah.
They make the World Series. I got to go because it might not happen again in my life. And so I go. They lose that one in 7 games. I had no clue they'd make it back the next year and win the whole thing. Yeah. But it was awesome, man.
I was in Kansas City. I was in Missouri at a church, and I went with some buddies. They were going to clinch to get into the. They were playing Baltimore, so I guess this was.
That was 2014, then, yeah.
Was it? Maybe. Yeah. Maybe it wasn't them. But whatever it was, they swept.
Yep.
And we set out right behind Kane.
Yeah.
Out in the outfield, and dudes, people had brooms. Yeah. I watched grown men cry, hugging their kids.
That was 2014 then, because like I said, that was that first year they went back, and just you see something be so bad for so long. Yeah. You're like, this is my reality. Like this is my lot in life to support a loser, and I'll never get to see it. And so that's why it was such a big deal to go.
It's a character builder.
It was. Yeah. And then, like I said, I was like, well, we got as close as you can get without getting there. We lost in 7 games in that World Series. Yeah. And then they went back the next year. I had expended my fun money
Yeah.
for flying across the country, going to World
Yes.
Series games. So I had to
Yeah.
enjoy 2015 when we actually won from my couch, but it was
Yes.
still fun. So.
Who's your favorite Royals of all time?
Man, like I said, it was hard to latch on to players when I was growing up because they were bad.
Yeah.
But really, I really loved Zach Greinke. Got his start in Kansas City back in the day.
Still
so
pitching,
we
right?
love. He's back with the Royals. Actually, he's
that's right.
in the twilight. He's not as hot anymore. But really liked him a lot. All the guys that were a big part of that core in the World Series run.
That was a fun group of guys, man.
Salvi, Perez. I actually
Yes.
have his jersey, which now that I think about it, jerseys on grown men is kind of weird when it's somebody who's younger than you.
Would you rather have a baseball jersey or would you rather have a football jersey?
I have both. I'm a super fan of a lot of things,
Yeah.
so I've
So
got
it doesn't matter. I think baseball jerseys are cool looking. I don't have
Yeah.
one. I do have I have a Russell Wilson Seattle Seahawks jersey.
Okay.
He's moved on, so now it's like
Yeah, those were
What I
his
do with that.
glory years though, because he's kind of he's in a
struggle-
bad way in Denver
struggle
right now.
bus.
But
Yeah.
Salvi's my guy. Another
Yeah.
guy that I really liked who didn't. He was around in 2014, but not around in 2015 because he kind of got traded and he was on the back half of his career too. His name was Billy Butler.
Yeah.
He was just a good old boy.
Yeah.
He can mash. He was a
Yeah.
big fat dude who played
Yeah.
first base. but
softball player.
He could mash it, and he had one of my favorite nicknames of all time. His nickname's Big Country Breakfast.
Big Country Breakfast.
What a
Nice.
nickname.
That's awesome.
Loved him though.
Yeah, those guys are great. Wade Davis was the reliever.
Lights out.
Dude, that dude could scare you.
Yeah.
He's like, you want some? Come on. You
Yeah.
know. Lorenzo Cain, I talked about him. Alex Gordon, Eric Hosmer, Mustakas. I love him. Yeah, man.
Moose.
That was so fun.
He had a stretch afterwards, I think, with the Reds. So a
Yeah.
lot of Reds fans around
Yeah.
here kind of.
He wasn't afraid to go after somebody. Very passionate dude. A lot of those, I mean,
They're fun.
Kane was, I mean, he's a freaking athlete, man.
It's
They had
crazy.
a little short guy, too, that was really fast. You remember his name?
Dyson,
Dyson, that's right.
because they would just steal bases like crazy.
Yes.
Gerard Dyson, man.
Yeah,
But
that's right, buddy. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
well, you're a Kansas State fan, too, right?
Kansas State Wildcats, man.
It's so funny because we've had a couple run-ins where the Cats have been playing some basketball against them, and we've
Yep.
taken some L's. I think you've been pretty good, pretty gracious toward us. I don't know. I mean, maybe I've not been in your proximity, but
Depends. Depends. My thing is, and I know it always seems at the expense of UK fans,
Yeah.
which gets people fired up a little
Right.
bit. At its core, man,
you're just a fan.
I'm supporting my team.
Yeah, that's right. You just
might-
happen to be surrounded by a bunch of different
know?
blue. Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah, that's
Here's
right.
one thing we have in common, though.
What's that?
We really all dislike the University of Kansas. So that's fine.
Gosh,
We have common ground.
living in Kansas or living in Missouri, dude.
Yep.
Yeah,
Rough.
All right, listen, we get to talk about two big words today. This is fun.
Yep.
I think this is fun. So today's two words is adoption's awesome. And it is. And we want to talk about just this high calling of adoption. Adoption's such a powerful concept that's so critical to the gospel. We'll talk about that. But as we get into today's podcast, there are a number of places in the Bible where we see God's movement in people's lives to adopt. And, you know, I probably will spend less time in some of these notes, but we see it first in Moses' life in Exodus 2. It's where Pharaoh's decree that all Jewish babies would be drowned in the Nile River. Moses' mother created a rescue plan for her son. She sent him down the river in a basket. I mean, I didn't grow up in church, but a lot, we hear these stories that, children talk about. But hoping that Egyptian authorities wouldn't find him, and in a dramatic plot list, Moses floated up to Pharaoh's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who had been bathing, and she took him and she raised him as her son, which, set him in one of the highest positions in all of it. I mean, only God does stuff like that. Pharaoh's daughter willingly accepts a Jewish baby as her own, and it quite literally changes the course of history. And not only was Moses' life spared by taking him in, but God used him to rescue all enslaved Israelites from Egyptians' power, Egypt's power with Pharaoh. We see it in Eli and Samuel. Again, we talked about this last week. Hannah's prayer: God, give me a son, and I'll give him back to you. And she does. And so theoretically, she has this baby, and she's trusting the Lord, and so she gives him back to Eli, and Eli raises basically this boy. And the cool thing about his name, Samuel, it means God is heard. I mean, what a cool background to just understand his story. But God hears Hannah's prayers, and just as she promised, she dedicated Samuel to God and took him to the temple, and he was raised by Eli the priest, and Samuel essentially is adopted and raised to be a prophet. Samuel went on to serve God in amazing ways as a prophet. One of the most notable displays when he anoints David, the most unlikely candidate, as the king of Israel. We see this in Mordecai and Esther. she's got such an interesting story. The book of Esther doesn't offer much information on her background, but it does teach us that she had no parents and was raised by her older cousin, Mordecai. His subtle, strong presence throughout her story and her life influenced the outcome of an entire people group. Through his encouragement, Esther courageously revealed herself as Jewish to the king of Persia, an act that God would use to save nearly the entire Jewish race. And then we see it in the Gospels with Joseph and Jesus. Jesus' stepdad. Obviously he's God's son, and God the Father is Jesus' son. But Joseph is in a spot where he's engaged to Mary. Mary finds out, an angel comes and visits her and tells her all this news about how he's going to usher in the gospel and this new covenant and redemption for all people. And then they have to wrestle with that. And Joseph goes, you know what? I'm in. Yeah. And the impact on Jesus, his life and in history, we can't measure that. But his adopted dad, Joseph, is a small piece of this story, but an essential piece nonetheless. And so there's really cool stories in the Bible where God moved in incredible ways to pursue orphans and children that needed to be loved and cared for and protected and adopted. I mean, David does that. He brings one to his table. I mean, there's all these stories, but the Bible shares a number of passages, and we're just going to make this really simple. Yeah. There are two that I think just stick out as we think about this, and it's James 1:27. And, I'll just read it, and you can say something about it. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you.
Yeah. I think when I think of that, I think it's just one of these things that there's a lot of things that when we hear in Scripture, we start to think about what that actually looks like for us. Yeah. And I think ones like this, where it's like, hey, the pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress. I think there's this thought of, well, somebody else can do that part. Yeah. Like, I don't need to do that because somebody else will pick up the slack. Yeah. And things like that maybe I'm not willing to do that yet, or things like that. Or
it's
that
an
might
all
not
skate.
Mean, but
when James says this, it's for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we get lost in religion because we're like, hey, we're not religious. We have a relationship with God. He's saying, no. Listen, if we're going to do the right things, you want to do the right things and honor God. He's saying, hey, here's the deal: care for orphans and widows. Yep. Care for people. Yeah. And these two specific groups of people are important. And obviously today we're talking about orphans. And then Psalm 68:6, God places the lonely in families.
Yeah. And I think adoption's a really, really beautiful picture of that. But also, too, I think that's just the nature of God in a lot of ways. And even though it might not be like family when you think about it from like your bloodline or things like that, too. I mean, that's the coolest thing about like Candace and I in our story. We've ever since we've been married, we've lived far from home. Yeah. Yeah. We lived 18-hour drive away in Phoenix, Arizona from where our family lives. And now here in Lexington, we're about 11, 12 hours from where our parents are and things like that too. But I don't know that we could say that we've honestly ever felt lonely. Yeah. And I think that's because God's just surrounded us even with people around us that, have been there for us in good and bad and all those other things too. And that's, we're not lacking. We're not in want or need really in a lot of different ways. And so if he's willing to do that for us, why wouldn't he also do that for those that are really at their most vulnerable as well? But then the cool, but also challenging part of that goes back to that James passage, man, the way God works is through his people. Yeah. Yeah. So our availability and our willingness to be a part of partnering with God in that's not just for a select few. Yeah. There's a responsibility that we all have if we're going to be a part of God's family.
So as you were talking about that, man, I'm coming around to this idea that really our best ability, as you think about all the different abilities, it's our availability. It really is. I mean, as you think about the people in Scripture, it's not about what they were able to do, is that they were willing to be available to be the hands and feet of God and be used by him. I think that's super important. So, and I do think that, as you were talking about this too, because we've been in different places. We've been 2,500 miles away from home. Yep. God is just good. And even, I was talking to guys last night at Fight Club. It says that God puts people, Proverbs, it says that God puts people in our life, friends that are closer than brothers, closer than our flesh and blood. Yeah. And I have that, and you have that too, and that's such a blessing. But as we get into adoption, we'll barely talk about foster care, but I know that probably will be something down the road. But we're going to focus predominantly on adoption here. But what did you all know about adoption? Did you know anything growing up? Did you know anybody that was adopted?
Honestly, for me, not a ton. Like thinking about growing up anyways and stuff,
Yeah.
like that was just not something. There might have been a few kids in my school that were maybe like adopted from overseas, but I didn't really know them super well or have a good concept of it, or
Right.
I just knew them from school. I never saw them like with their parents to kind of see, hey, maybe they don't look exactly like their parents. It would kind of make you like wonder, hey, what's going on there, things like that, or there's that, or even like, honestly, this sounds bad. I feel like some of the earliest like concepts of adoption for me were probably like really negative, like growing up, like adoption being used as an insult.
Yeah, you're
like when you're
slamming somebody.
Yeah, you're like going back and forth telling like your mama jokes or things like that too. It's like, well, you're adopted, and it's like, you know, that's such an awful thing to
Especially
consider.
now. Those are fighting words, my friend.
But it's one of those things that, like, you know, that was some of it, or seeing it on TV.
Yeah.
You know, like this big reveal later on in somebody's life that they were adopted, and the emotional tailspin that sends somebody down that was always just painted in a really negative light. So not a lot. It was probably a little bit more of a concept that became real to me in college. I had a really awesome, incredible professor who did a lot of our counseling, family ministry type stuff.
That's awesome.
That was just a big part of his story, and he really was the one who helped not just teach, but really kind of showed us that, man, this is God's heart.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of how he had built his family with his wife and stuff too. And so it was just one of those things. Sometimes I think you see things. I think God puts people in your life to help really open your mind up to things that you didn't really know about. And he just modeled what that could look like really well. And it was somebody I admired. And so it was like, you know, I could see that for our family someday. Yeah. That was when I was in college thinking through that stuff though too. So
I'm like you, didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
Not a person that I can ever remember. Nobody in my family. And the one thing I remember, and it was weird as I thought about this, just kind of preparing, the news would come on, Channel 32 in Louisville, and I don't know what the lady's name is, Liz something, but she would do a segment on Wednesdays at night called Wednesday's Child. And so it'd be 8 minutes, something like that. And you basically have, I just remember it vividly because every Wednesday they would have a story. And so take a few minutes to highlight this local child or maybe even these siblings together. And they talk a little bit about just who they are and what they're good at and what grade they're in, and then they would ask if anybody would consider adopting them, and they'd have a number, you know, that type of thing. And I thought, man, it was right there in our city, you know, but it still felt so far away. And so, how did God lead you guys to that place where because again, when we talked about last week, you could have walked down these roads too. Yeah. All these other, we did IUI. There's IVF. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. But you guys were going, nope, this is where we're going.
Yeah. So we'd probably been a couple years into like our infertility struggles and just learning more about what that was, what that wasn't, those options, things like that. And honestly, it was something that God had really started to lay more on my wife's heart before mine. Yeah. Like it was just something that was just really, really present for her. And for her, it was like Candace was just saying, hey, this is like a completely separate thing from our infertility struggles. Like I know it seems cause and effect and things like that. If you were to look at it, like just if you laid it all out on the table, it would seem very cause and effect. But it was completely separate for her. Like she had been hearing from the Lord that this was how we were going to start our family. Yeah. But I ashamedly tuned that out. Yeah. Like I tuned that out for a while because I felt like
you were in the middle of this thing.
Yeah, and I felt like pursuing adoption was a concession.
That's a big statement.
Like
I think a lot of people feel that way.
I felt like it was giving up on believing that God could take a diagnosis that wasn't a diagnosis of unexplained infertility.
For good or bad. Right?
And that he could defy that and help us get pregnant naturally and have a biological child and stuff. And so that's, you know, I don't like that that's a part of our story, but it is a part of our story.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. I think people can feel that way for sure.
Yeah, but it was also right around that time that I led a group of students on a mission trip to Haiti. This is my second year going back actually to that same spot, same location. Yeah. And while we were on those trips, you know, we were helping do some stuff at a school. It's a school that John worked at that he talks about and stuff a lot of times. You maybe have heard him talk about that. But when we were on these trips, we'd always take a day to go to a hospital that also had an orphanage that was a part of it. And we'd get to spend some time just connecting with kids, having fun, just giving, you know, opportunity for our students to kind of expand their worldview a little bit, but also just to give some those kids a little bit of break from like just their reality by playing with some people that really wanted to and things like that. Yeah. And so the crazy thing was that, like I said, this was the second time I'd been back in a year or within the span of a year.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remembered the second time walking back in and seeing kids that I had seen the year before, and that wrecked me. Yeah. They recognized me. They remembered me. I remembered them and seeing how much they had grown within a year, but also just matching that with the reality that they were still there.
Yeah, still an orphan.
They still were an orphan, and that just wrecked me. And that night, went back to our room where we were staying, and I had a dream.
Yeah.
And that dream was some of those kids like coming up to me saying very vividly, like, we need someone like you to be our dad.
Yeah.
And I like wake up in a cold sweat. Ben McGill, who's on our staff here, he was there leading that trip with me, and he was my roommate. And I think he probably was like, dude, you okay or whatever. And in my mind, I'm like, dude, I think I just had some like, this is like a reactionary dream to like bad Haitian goat and rice and beans or something like that. But I couldn't shake it.
Sure.
The rest of the time we were there, it just stuck with me. And when I got home, I talked to Candace about it, and I was like, you're absolutely right. We need to pursue adoption.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was completely separate from our infertility struggles.
Yeah.
But I think God used my really, really wise wife and those experiences that I had to really wake me up to what he was really challenging us to do all along.
Yeah. It's funny that we have so much in common there too. I mean, for me, I remember the moment we were sitting on this porch in Cane Valley where my wife's grandmother grew up. She's now passed away, but we still have that farmhouse down there, and we just were talking. And you can look out and you see the barn, and I remember her saying, "Man, I really feel like maybe God's telling us to adopt." And I had never thought about it. Like I just been in this moment of just going, I guess I'm trying to protect her, and I'm not trying to look for a way out. I mean, I'm just going, hey, God's going to do this. We're gonna, and it was just so foreign. But then again, being here on staff, and I've done other mission work at other places, but we took 80 people to Haiti. And, we were in that orphanage right across from where you guys probably were. And, for 13 days, we're hanging out and doing VBS stuff and making jewelry and taking them to the ocean and playing in the water. And I remember when I had to move them, there's 80 of us. We got multiple buses. I'm like, hey, okay, this is the last day. I need you to say goodbye. Pray with them, give them a hug, that type of thing. And then I'm trying to move myself to get on the bus just to show them, hey, this is with the direction. And I can't do it. I don't want to do it. But I know that we got stuff to do, and we're getting ready to, we're going to be flying out, the next day, and we got all kinds of stuff. And so, but I'm just watching them. I can't get them to get on the bus, man. And these kids, I mean, boy, girl, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they're freshman or senior. They're balling, man. I mean, and I'm going, could I grab a couple of these kids and bring them home? I'm cool with it. I don't care about their skin color. It makes no difference to me. This matters, and so but I'll press pause on that stuff. This is again just some information stuff, because some of us, so you may be in this spot where you're just trying to wrestle through. Maybe you've gone, I've never even thought about this, and that's totally cool. I would just love for you just to kind of listen in and, I don't know, see what God does. So this may be a podcast where you go, oof, this was one that maybe changed everything. I don't know. But there's all kinds of different ways to do this. There are international adoption. That's where you adopt a child from another country, just like what we were talking about. We have a number of families in our church. And to be honest with you, this is not an exhaustive list, but we've got Russia and China and Poland and India and Haiti and Bulgaria. I got to see Will Briggs and Dimitar today. And Dimitar, he's just got such a cool story. He's such a cool kid. But we have a number of staff that have adopted children internationally. I have a friend that lives in Topeka, Kansas. I don't know if you know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We shouldn't do that here. But he's adopted several children from international kids that have special needs, significant special needs. I have some dear friends, Bart and Jody Stone, who had their own son, Keaton, biologically, and then after that had trouble infertility-wise, and then eventually that led them to adopt 2 daughters from China. We got friends and former coworkers, Aaron Ranson and Lee Ranson, who have biological twins, and then after that they felt compelled to adopt a son from China. Previous churches I've been in, there have been multiple families that have adopted a bunch of kids from Peru, families that have adopted kids from Liberia and Africa. I've known families that have grown children that are literally retired in their 60s, and God puts it on their heart, and they adopt teenage girls from Peru. It's wild. So those are just some of those stories, just as you're thinking about stuff. Then there's also domestic adoptions. This is where a family adopts a child from the United States. it could be a child right here where you live. It could be somewhere in the United States. I've heard stories of connections through our crisis pregnancy centers. I've heard stories of families taking in and adopting from their own families. I've heard of families in churches that I've been a part of adopting children from inside the church. I've heard of foster families that made the decision after fostering for a while to go, you know what, man, it started with foster care, and it ended up in a place where we want to adopt this child, but also their siblings.
Yeah.
Families that go to local adoption organizations or national organizations, they're trusting God to connect them with the right child or the right children that God will put in front of them. We went through Bethany Christian Services. That's who we went through. It's a national agency. It's one that you're welcome to check out. I've heard of families that chose to adopt Native American children from Indian reservations. I've heard of families that weren't even really looking, and all of a sudden they never even like, oh wait, and then boom, it's happening. There wasn't a road. They weren't going down this thing. They weren't even dealing with anything. God just put something in front of them, and they were obedient. They were available. So there's a lot of things to consider, and anything you want to jump in here, feel free to. There's international, there's domestic. Here's a big one: adopting babies or children, little kids or teenagers. And I want to make a note of this. Okay, this is big. The older the child is, the less likely they are to get adopted. And that sucks, man. Many just stay in foster care system, and eventually they age out of the foster care system and they become adults. And that's really tragic, really tragic. And we're not here to should on anybody today. I've said the word should, but we should really wrestle with it, If you adopt internationally, oftentimes it's really hard to get any family history or medical history about that child. If you adopt domestically, there's something called open adoptions and closed adoptions. I'll kind of break that open for a second. Open adoption means that there's some level of openness between a birth mom and the adopted parents. And some of you might go, that was pretty freaky for me. I just thought, we either adopt internationally or domestically, and it's closed.
It's like when the judge signs the papers, it's just a done deal.
Peace out.
It's a common misconception. I think in a lot of different ways.
And open it's a sliding scale. Some of them may be as simple as just pictures and letters once a year. It could be as open as periodic or annual visits. We've had that. And here's the deal: you don't need to freak out about it. Just trust the Lord to know that whatever He wants for you and whatever He wants for this child is best. But it's definitely something you have to consider. It's definitely something that you have to get more information on, really wrestle down with prayer and discussion with your spouse. It's definitely something that you can discuss with your adoption agency, just to because our adoption agency was big on this open adoption. And the reason is because it's actually really healthy for the birth mom, which I think sometimes when we go into adoption, we don't think as much about. And I want to make sure that we talk about that. But it's also helpful for the adopted child when there's an opportunity for them to know a little bit about their history or who their mom was, or maybe even who their birth dad may be. But it helps them process emotionally. Closed adoptions are exactly what you think they are. They're closed, no relationship, no correspondence, no visits. And sometimes, you know what? It's actually not healthy. And so then that may be best that they not connect with them. But sometimes it is, and we just have to kind of process that out with the Lord. But anyway, anything in that before
one thing, like, just when considering that is, like, one, don't feel like if that's something you want to learn more about or you have to pursue, that you have to do that in isolation. Like, you're going to feel way better about it, and you're going to actually just be more open, I think, if you learn as much as you can. So even if it's taking time to rewind back through what Scott's talking about here, like in this, or maybe it is just the opportunity really to just do a lot of research on your own. But I do think, specifically when you talk through like international, domestic, open, closed, all those other things too, like, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more too, but really take the time to pray and consider, because when you think about, there's obviously three parties in any adoption. They call it the triangle a lot of times, not the With Jesus in Community on Mission one, but like the adoption triangle, because it takes all three parties, whether that be the child, the birth parents, and the adoptive parents. They all play a role in that. But specifically for the child, because it's such a hard thing and a beautiful thing at the same time, though, that they might not comprehend, especially if you adopt as a baby, but especially later on too. There's just going to be a ton of identity issues that will continue to be something that the adoptive parents will have to make sure you kind of nurture through that as they get older, but also too, how that can be a really beautiful thing that's modeled for for kids to kind of see what that can actually be in a healthy way. That's just something to really consider. There might be some reasons why closed is best. Same thing with like open's a lot harder if you go international versus domestic and things like that too. And so just learn.
Yeah.
There's a need. That's not the question, but also you don't want to rush into the wrong thing for the kid, for that birth parent, but also for you and your family as well. So
it's funny. Oftentimes we kind of go, you go, oh, that's really cool. I could never do that.
yeah.
Well, chances are the people that are doing that thought that they could never do that.
Oh
too.
yeah. It goes back to that what we talked about earlier. It's like, oh well, I don't know that I could do that, but somebody else probably will.
Yeah.
That's just not the case.
Not the case. Not the case. There's assumptions here. We assume that all the kids that are being given up for adoption are because of teenage moms, and that's just not true. I don't know what the current age or approximation is, but what I knew when we went down this road is the average birth mom at that time was 27 years old, and this wasn't their first baby.
Yeah.
They had other children, or at least another child, and they went, you know what, this is too big.
Yeah.
I can't do this. I don't want to do this to them. And so if God moves your heart to adopt, I need you to know that your birth mom, at least your birth mom, and maybe there's a birth dad in that equation, oftentimes not, but I need you to know that your birth mom is someone that matters to God.
Deeply.
Deeply. They're not your enemy. We live in a broken world, and it's hard. And most often birth moms, you need to know this, that choose adoption are making a very courageous, selfless decision to give this child something that she cannot give them. And she may equally feel called. She may feel it out of convenience, but she may actually equally feel called that this is the right thing for her to do. And that decision comes with a lot of pain, emotional processing, maybe some shame, and even faith in Jesus, to trust him, knowing that he will place them with the right family. So just know that going into your situation, if the Lord leads you down there, that there's I need you to see them as God sees them, not just as, oh gosh, they have something that we want and we don't, we're just fearful of what we don't know.
Yep.
A couple things I need to share about adoption to get off my chest. And I need you to hear me. Adoption's not a JV choice for families. It's not.
Yep.
I know that for families struggling with infertility, that it may take you a minute to get to that place to process some of your own painful circumstances and then grieve those because of not having biological children. But I need you to know this, it's not JV. It's not second rate. It's not even close. I have 2 biological kids, and I have 1 adopted kid. And I will tell you, man, it doesn't, I love them the same.
Yep.
I love them the same. 3 daughters, and I could not love them more. And I don't love one different because she wasn't in Sarah's stomach. It doesn't. I love the story that God writes in our lives, and that's what matters. Adoption isn't just for couples that struggle with their own, that can't have their own biological children. I know plenty of families full of biological children, and they have no struggles with infertility. They just felt called. They were available, and they went, there's a big need, and this is what James says, and so maybe we should wrestle with it. It's not just for those who have trouble having their own biological children. Also adoption, and I'll throw in foster care in here as well. Let me just say this because I want to make sure everybody hears this. It's hard sometimes.
Yeah, your notes here say sometimes it can be really hard.
Should I?
It's just hard.
It's just hard.
It's just hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
There are times where babies are born with different health issues, which are hard. There are times when kids have been put in foster care systems that have been abused or neglected physically, sexually. That's hard. There are kids that have been neglected. They could have been 18 months or 13 years old, and they come into your home with trauma and painful wounds that have an impact on them, and it can have an impact on your family. But man, where do they go?
Yeah.
God's families are the best places for these babies and children and teenagers. And I love what Paul Tripp says. He says, there's no more consistent application of the gospel than to open our homes to someone that desperately needs a family of faith and a family of love.
Yep.
I mean, it's like when I came into, I just told my story a couple episodes ago, and it's like I was a freaking hot mess when I came to the church.
Yeah.
You know what they did? They just loved me as I was.
Yeah.
And if we do this for the church, well, I mean, the church is a family.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we wrestle with the possibility of what might that look like for us?
Yeah, that was what was kind of interesting, and this isn't a knock. I think it's just like a cultural thing. That was something that really kind of threw me when I moved to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Was, you hear all the time about like Southern hospitality and things like that, but I also kind of learned to struggle that sometimes that was like, hey, really, I think the tendency sometimes can be is like that, hey, we're going to be really hospitable and welcoming. We'll have you into our home and stuff up front, but that's about as deep as we'll let you go into our mess or into like our reality in a lot of different ways. So just that idea of like, we're willing to open up our home.
Just coming in the front room though.
Yeah, don't come in the living room.
Yeah.
Don't come in the bedroom, or like all these other areas that feel like they're the parts that we can kind of wall off and keep from what it is. But there's nothing about following God that you do halfway.
No.
There's nothing about it.
Right.
And so that's where this same idea comes. Like when you talk about there's no more consistent application of the gospel than to open our homes. And that's not just for a meal here and there. That might mean for some of you to be willing to go all in on that.
Open adoptions come with their own challenges. Closed adoptions eventually come with their own challenges. If they don't initially, international adoptions come with their own challenges. Such is life, man. Biological children can come with their own challenges, and they do. Life's hard, but I'll remind you what Gary Black says, God pays for what he orders. If God calls you to adopt, he'll connect you with a child or multiple children. He'll provide you the grace and strength and wisdom and people resources that you need to love and invest in them spiritually and navigate whatever comes your way. God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. That's important, man.
Yeah.
That's important. So anything you want to add about that important information, then we'll kind of get into our stories.
It's tough to just do a primer like that. I think it's helpful, but just kind of a reminder, man, no two adoptions are the same.
Yeah.
You've got to remain really open-handed with the whole process. But when you are considering like what's best for the child, you have to be really honest with yourself about what you can and can't provide.
Yeah, that's right.
You have to be. And it's not just in that moment of finally getting to hold a baby in your arms, maybe after you've waited and waited and waited. It's about what you're able to provide for that child for the rest of your life and theirs.
That's right.
And I know that's hard to forecast
Trying
sometimes.
to count the cost,
But really, really consider that. And you said this, but I'm blown away by this every time we get to spend time with our daughter's birth mom. But man, birth moms who make adoption plans are the most courageous people on the face of the planet.
And it's okay to esteem them.
Yeah, because in that process, for most agencies are going to walk moms through their options. Like if they come to a crisis center or potentially an adoption agency, they're going to walk them through all their options, especially when it feels like they have none. And that's a hard thing because there's easier options than adoption for birth moms who don't know how to take care of their kids or don't have the resources or in crisis or things like that.
Want to move on from this.
There are easier options that the world and our culture would tell them to pursue.
Yeah, man.
Or there's just the emotional toll of being connected to that baby that is theirs. That they're growing and they're connected with forever as well. That they're making a choice to choose what's best for that child, even if it might mean not being parented by them. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And that's just something I always want to make sure is a really, really big part of just considering adoption, whether that's open, closed, international, whatever. Because some of that information you might get to know and others you might not. Just don't let adoption be transactional. Don't let it be transactional.
Just unpack that real quick because I know what
like
you're saying.
If the thought process is just like, I need to use this birth mom who's at the worst moment of her life as a means to an end to get what I want. As I even say that out loud, you sound like that sounds awful to say it that way, doesn't it?
That's right.
But I think if we're not careful, it can be that way. And so, I don't know. Wasn't planning on saying that, but
no, it's good. I think if you're wrestling or even have thought about wrestling, talk to families that you know that have been down this road. There's plenty of families in our church that you could just ask a lot of questions to and seek more understanding. Even before you ever get into an adoption agency, you can check obviously with those too. But just helpful. There's a lot of people in our church. So let's this is the best part, man. Let's talk about your all's adoption story. What was that process like? I know that you used a couple organizations, and you're again in all of this. I need you to know this. This is a podcast, and it's public and it's forever. And so we're gonna walk a line here to do this right, just because we want to honor our children and these other families, and then our story along the way too. So feel free to just walk that line, and if we got to walk it back, we'll walk it back. But
so. I mentioned in the last episode, I won't get too far into that, but obviously infertility struggles, all that other stuff, and then God really revealed to us, that this was its own unique calling, which is really, really cool. So it was around 2018, I think. 2018-ish is when we really we're really open and just told like, hey, our family, we're going to pursue this, our friends, our family, our church, everything.
Yep.
Just really did that. And so we just started really like learn and talk to people. We met with, I remember talking to you. I remember talking to so many other families in our church that had done international and domestic and closed and open and all those other things. And we just tried to learn a lot first. The couple of things that really came to mind for us that were just a really, really high priority for us. And I alluded to our heart for this and what I just said before, but man, how agencies care for birth moms, not just during that process, but also after the process, was a really, really big deal for us.
These are questions you should ask if you're wrestling with adoption. You should ask the adoption agencies about what is the aftercare for these birth moms.
You should, because then if it's just like, well, I don't really care what happens after it, that's where it gets into that transactional thing that just feels gross. And so, and like I said, that's our heart. I don't want to. I don't want to should on anybody, like you just said. But so that led us to a few specific, and then also just candidly, you know, when it came to the international versus domestic, things like that, we just walked through enough scenarios in our ministry and just realizing that there was a huge need, like right in our backyard where we were. And so actually the first agency we chose was somebody that we felt really confident about. One, just understanding like our priorities and our faith and what that meant for us and how we wanted to pursue adoption, just be really open about that. But also to do that locally, as local as we could. Yeah. And we knew that might take longer. We knew it might not mean spreading ourselves out like to, you know, this agency or like having books and profiles with agencies all over the place and things like that. But we picked one here. Okay. And it was a really, really small agency. Yeah. There's one lady who had been doing it for decades, and she had some like part-time clerical help, things like that. And so we went through the whole home study process, which we don't need to get too far into that, but it's a process, man.
Yeah, it is.
To be
don't think that once you do this, it's just
foster
it's gonna take
care, adoption,
classes,
all that stuff,
CPR stuff, all this stuff.
Like I said, we chose the agency and really walked down that road probably 2018. Most of that year before like our profile was really out there. And it's towards the end of that year that our profile had been out there. And
when you say profile, it's usually a book that's just kind of basically some pictures and a little bit of information about your family. Yeah. It feels like a little bit of a catalog.
A little bit.
You know, it feels a little weird, but these birth moms are going to have an opportunity to look at these and maybe God will give them clarity as to what.
Yeah, and I don't want to, like you just said it, I don't want to hyper spiritualize it or anything, but I really do believe that God will take like your family's story and make that sort of jump off the page if it's the right fit for that birth mom and that birth family and things like that as well. And so, but anyway, so we start down that road, probably had been out there for about 3 months or so. The agency we chose was really protective. Like they wouldn't tell us like, oh, hey, somebody looked at your book this week. They're considering you and things like that. Cause that could just pull you in a million different directions. Like, is this happening? Should we get excited?
I'll
Should
pause
we
for
not?
just a second.
Yeah.
Ours was the opposite.
Really?
So we get an email going, hey, birth mom K at this blah, blah, blah. And so, dude, you're just, that's a hard thing because, dude, it just, I couldn't tell you how many emails. I bet 40, 50 emails.
Because on the one side, there's the excitement of you see something in your inbox from your agency, oh my gosh, this is it. And then like it's met with just more disappointment and things like that.
I don't know if that's good or bad. There's a lot, sometimes not knowing is better than
sometimes,
knowing, you know. So, but anyway, keep going, man.
So that's where we just kind of were in that. But anyways, we hear something towards the end of that year. Yeah. We're like, maybe this is something. Yeah. It was not at all what we expected. Yeah. So we get a call actually from somebody who was on the board of directors for this tiny agency who let us know that the director, who also was the social worker and just the person basically who did it, she died unexpectedly. She was in her early 50s, died in her sleep. Just, it was one of those things that, so they said, hey, it's the holidays, but also like our board of directors is really trying to scramble to figure out what we're going to do. Yeah. So we were just on hold. And then it was leading up to the beginning of 2019. Sure. That, and I might be getting my years mixed up here, but I know it was at the beginning of the year that they basically had said, hey, the board has come to the decision that we really can't do this without her, the way it was set up. And so I don't know if you hear that like phrase sometimes, like bad leadership, sometimes like, man, an organization lives and dies on somebody, and that's not a good thing. Right. That phrase became really real. It got real. And that's not her. It was just small. Yeah. Like that just, it was what it was. And so what they did is we basically got back all of the information that when you're a prospective, like adoptive parent, you never get back usually. Yeah. Like our profile, all of our home study stuff and things like that, because the agency keeps that to either file with like the state or the country for all the like the legal stuff, or it's stuff that gets shared with the birth parents. Right. to be able to like let them make a choice on if these are the people that they want to choose to adopt their kid and stuff. So I had all that. And I remember sitting in the parking lot of this office, somebody just came and met me and handed me just a yellow manila folder with everything. And I just remember that was probably one of my biggest like knockout, drag down fights with God.
Yeah. Really?
I was just like, this is not supposed to be this way. There's a whole lot of other things about her story.
Yeah, right.
But that's where I was like, it's not supposed to be this way.
Yeah.
And you know that, God.
Yeah.
I remember saying that, like screaming that into my steering wheel.
Yeah.
I was, the place we were at, their office is right across from like El Rancho Tapatio, you know, over there on Burt Roads. People were probably walking across to go get Mexican food. They see me freaking out in the car. But yeah, man, it was hard. Yeah. It was really, really hard. And so.
Did you all lose quite a bit of money in that?
Honestly, no. Some.
Okay.
But we had invested.
It's a question
into
that I was thinking, and probably some other people were going.
Yeah, we'd obviously put some down, and obviously people were like supporting us, fundraising, things like that. But the board was really gracious to say, hey, we honestly we're not able. So part of it was like, hey, how can we close well? But then like most of what was set aside in accounts, we were able to get back, which was nice.
So you find another organization?
Yeah. So we started looking around, and honestly, a big part of looking around was trying to find people who would honor the parts of the process we had already been through.
Yeah. You have to start all the way over,
a lot were like, hey, we can't do that. We need a whole new home study. We need a whole new this. And it's like, dude, that took
go through
so
their
long
classes.
to do that. And so we found one that was more based out of the Louisville area that honored a large majority of that process that we felt really, really confident in. And they did a lot when it came to aftercare for moms, resourcing, all that other stuff. And so we did that. And actually, now I think about it, I think I got my years wrong. That was leading up into 2020.
Okay.
So we all know what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
You know, and so we're still doing all the things that we need to do.
Has impacts on everything, including this.
Big time.
Yeah.
And so, but we find an organization at the beginning of 2020, March 2020, the world shuts down. So now all of our like classes that we have to go to through them, support groups, while we're out there, like our profiles being shown and stuff like that. But that's all on Zoom. We did a home study. I remember literally taking like my computer and walking around showing people like the cabinet locks that we have and stuff like that.
Yes.
Like it was weird.
Yes.
It was just weird. And it was kind of another thought process that creeped in of like, man, this is just gonna be another hurdle that might keep this from happening.
Yeah.
But that summer, I remember very vividly, we're in the middle of this weird summer of trying to pivot a lot of things we were doing in student ministry. Right. We tried to host like camp here and everybody was sitting 5 chairs apart and it was awkward and all that other stuff. Yeah. And I remember we were going back for a night session here for something we were doing for camp, just on campus because we couldn't travel that summer and stuff. And I remember going to get coffee, and I remember getting a call that we had a mom who was really, really, like, they called us to let us know we had a mom who was really, really excited about us as a potential fit. Yeah. And so I called Candace and trying to, like, ask questions to kind of just, like, be able to relay information to her because I wasn't with her. I was in the parking lot of a coffee shop, all this other stuff. And that was in, like, July. Okay. And so we learn a lot about like her circumstances and all this other stuff. And then they kind of come to us with different things about her circumstances that we had to kind of wrestle with and kind of understand like, yeah, we're confident about this. We think we can do this, all that other stuff. Yeah. And then it was about a month after that, we got to go meet her in person. Yeah. And she's, like I said, not here in town, a little bit further away. How far along
was she at the time?
So didn't know. So
okay.
like you had mentioned, it was one of those things that she had other kids. Mm-hmm. So she knew she was pregnant, but like with where she was at and things like that, it was one of those things like she just hadn't really sought a lot of care yet. And she was pro. She had other kids, you know, that she had, and they were hers and all that other stuff. But just her circumstances at that time, and so she was like, "I know I'm pregnant. I kind of have an idea of how far along I am." Yeah. But so we actually didn't know, but we knew she was pretty far along.
Sure.
So I just remember we went to meet her for a meal with like her and the adoption advocate and then us. And
isn't that something, man?
Sweating bullets all the way down the interstate there, just so nervous. Yeah. Like it feels like a
please paint this picture accurately because I think it's helpful for people to know.
Yeah, so
we're going to meet this
driving,
person.
Yeah, and it's like we're going to like meet. It's like early enough for like a meal, so we meet at like a Cheddar's.
Yeah, we made it the Applebee's neighborhood bar and grill. That's where we did.
It's just got something for everybody, you know. You don't want to pick something that's really niche.
That's right.
So Cheddar's, Applebee's, all those places, they had everything. So, but I just remember, man, very vividly, just being so anxious, and so nervous because what they see on the pages of a book, you just hope and pray that it seems real. Yeah. That we're not just some storybook people that are gonna like that we want to be authentic, but we also just want her to know how much we care about her.
You feel like you're interviewing for a job that you really, really want.
Yeah.
But there's also something on the backside to go, hey, but you know what? If this is not the right thing, God, then please protect our heart. But it'd be cool if it did, you know. And so,
Yeah, and then also just balancing through that whole process, man. She's in charge.
yeah,
She's in charge. This is
you are not in
100%.
control.
This is 100% her call,
That's
and
right.
not even just up to like saying like. And we came away from that, and she felt really confident about us, and we
Yeah.
had great conversations. We even talked about names and all that stuff like there.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things that then afterwards, so we came home, knew we had a match, kind of had an estimate of how far along she was in her pregnancy and stuff, and then she thought she was going into labor actually at one point, but it wasn't. It was kind of a scare, but then that was able to kind of like get her in and get some testing done. And so then we found out we had a due date in October. So that's like, okay, we got a couple months here. So we cleaned out the room that we knew we were going to turn into like the nursery, all this other stuff. But then in September,
But did you know what she was having though? Did you?
yeah. So and it was really funny actually. I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but it makes
Well,
sense.
don't.
No, it makes sense here. It's fine.
Okay.
I was the primary contact for our agency.
Yeah.
You know, I work at a church.
Yeah.
What we do is really important, but I've got a ton of flexibility here.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really grateful for that. My wife's a school teacher.
Sure.
It's the beginning of the school year. She can't just take a phone call.
Yeah, you're getting
When
information.
I was
and
the
you
one
get to
getting the
get it first.
information.
Sure.
So the cool thing was, man, like, yeah, I remember getting the call and being able to tell Candace, hey, we have a due date.
Yeah.
Hey, we found out the gender.
Yeah.
And then I got to plan out a gender reveal for Candace.
That's cool.
And if you think about like what, like, I hate that, but like quote unquote, like the normal,
I get it.
like it's usually the
Yeah.
wife gets to reveal, like, you know, she gets to show you the pee sticks, oh, we're pregnant,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and then like you do a lot of that stuff together. She's the one that tells you my water broke, we're going into labor. I actually kind of got to do that in a lot of different ways, which is cool because I'd get the call and tell Candace,
Sure.
hey, it's time.
Right.
It's go time.
Yeah.
And our go time actually happened about a month before we anticipated. So she was born early.
Ours too.
And yeah, it
Month
was
early.
just, it was fun to be able to do that. So September 22nd.
When you got the call, what happened? Was she because this is September, right? I mean, her birthday. She just had her birthday.
yeah,
So
September 22nd.
okay, so where are you at the time, and
It
where's?
was an early morning, so Candace hadn't even left for school yet.
Okay, so
and
it's a weekday.
Yep, weekday. I just started my new job here. Like
in this role that you're currently in?
and I was in the process of still finishing at Lexington while we were trying to hire somebody to take my
Yeah.
role. So I was kind of in both worlds, starting a new job,
Yeah.
still dealing with 2020 stuff,
Yeah.
all that. So we get a call, and I go over and I tell Candace, and so luckily, like I said this before, so she calls her principal, tells her what's happening, all this other stuff, and yeah, so we hustle over. It's the same thing. It's like the same thing when you're driving over to meet her, and now it's like,
It's go time.
but it's go time, but also it's met with the gravity.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
This is not a done deal yet.
Yeah. There's rights to be terminated.
There's a
decisions
whole
to
lot
be
of
made.
stuff, but
Yep.
but yeah, even in the midst of all that, she was born. You know, we got texts like while we were there, and it's crazy because I remember it's COVID, so hospitals and COVID, nobody was getting. I talked to friends of ours who had babies right around the same time that they were only like even some of their spouses couldn't be in the delivery room.
Yeah.
Like they were like kind of near, they might
Yeah.
be in the delivery room, but like other support things like that too. And so for strangers,
Yeah.
essentially we were fully waiting to just sit in the parking lot of that hospital until we got the call that we could come in, and the agency worked all that stuff out that we would have had a room when we knew we could come in.
Yep.
But we get there, they're like, hey, come on in.
Yeah.
They tell us that, and we were actually able to just be in the lobby, which lobbies in hospitals at that time weren't a thing.
Pretty empty.
It
at the
was
time.
empty, and I
Yeah.
remember Friends was playing on the TV and like not really watching that because I'm just like waiting for a buzz on my phone, and
Yeah.
then we get pictures from the adoption advocate who was in the delivery room, first pictures we see, and so then we were like, okay, she's here,
Yeah.
like all this other stuff, and you're sorting through these things, and you're doing it through a screen even though she's not that far away. And then they had told us, hey, when it's time for you to meet her, we'll get you into your own hospital room that we'll bring her into the room.
Yep.
So somebody comes to get us, and they open up these big doors, and we're like, this is taking us to the hallway that we're going to go to the room, and then we'll wait.
Yeah.
Those doors open, and the nurse is holding our daughter right there.
Oh, buddy.
And we just lose it, man.
Yeah,
Like, we're just like, it's I wish, like, don't hear me wrong on all the COVID stuff and things like that. We've got pictures of that. Like the adoption advocate was taking pictures. Like, I hate that you can't see our full facial expressions because of masks and all that other stuff. But like it's one of the coolest moments, and it was just real.
Yeah.
And it was really only the beginning of our time together before we started the step-by-step marathon within like those 72 hours, like in the hospital, like waiting for termination of rights, and just that hard season for her, and time in the room with our birth mom, and together time, which was really, really valuable and really, really important. But yeah, man, it was one of the coolest days of my whole life. That
yeah, man, it's the best.
It's the best, man.
It's
and
the coolest
it's
thing.
funny because you hear that, and the things you think you always wanted, you know, out of the way that you imagine your life going. And when you talked earlier about like, this isn't a less than
JV.
Option.
It's not, man.
Man, the minute that we just saw her as those doors opened up, like there was, I knew, regardless of how it turned out, I knew there was going to be some kind of connection between my wife and I and that little girl. Yeah. So
I mean, as you're telling your story, it's so awesome. I'm thinking about mine too. You know, it's like we had been chosen, and we said absolutely, and you know, we're thinking this is going to be probably around January and it's a little girl, and I've got one girl, you know, and actually the day that we found out that we were going to get where we got chosen by the birth mom, we found out we were pregnant. It's the craziest thing, man. And so 2 babies in a matter of an hour and all this kind of stuff. So there's so many things spinning around our minds. But I'm thinking, you know, we got a ways before this one, and we'll just pray. It's a shocker, but only God. And that was like November 16th is when we got the call, and we found out we were pregnant too. It's one of the greatest days of my life. And then in December, I'm in Seattle working on a sermon. We didn't have great offices. I had like a little shed by my house, and so I usually try to work in somewhere where it has good heat or good air, you know, or good internet. And I was just up in this area. I was working on something, and Sarah calls me, and she says, "Hey, her water broke. She's going to have the baby." And it was so early, and I was so concerned about, gosh, well, there's rights to be terminated and all these different things. This is not the order in which I thought it was going to be. And I'm like trying to protect us. And I'm a verbal processor, and I'm saying this out loud, and I just hear my wife go, "Hey, get home, we're going." And I'm like, I love that woman. I mean, we just, it's funny how sometimes you got to balance or bring clarity to each other. We're both trying to do the right things, but it was clear and so we get down there, and we it's not a COVID year, and so we ended up in our own room as well, and we got to spend time with birth mom. Birth dad's not anywhere, but it was just one of those things where I remember walking through the door when we were finally able to get to see her, and I got my 10-year-old who's now 21, you know, and I can still see the door, and you open it up, and then we wash our hands, and then we look to the left, and she's right there, and she's a month, you know, premature. She's 5 pounds. She's our smallest baby. And dude, it's just, you go, man, thank you. There was some stuff on the backside of it, waiting for all of the stuff to finally land and all of that. But and I got 2 biologicals, and I can tell you, it doesn't feel different. It doesn't feel any different. And we're blessed. We're blessed. So anyway, we have, you know, my daughter's name's Everly, and her name's Everly Grace, and in fact the middle name, my oldest daughter gave her
that's cool.
her
I
middle
didn't know
name
that.
Grace. Grace just means gift.
Yeah.
You know. So, and Everly we wanted it to be unique, and it's her name. And it's funny, you make a unique name, and then other people, there's other Everlys, you know. So, but she's freaking the best kid ever. I mean, I've got great kids, and I'm so blessed. But let's talk about your daughter's name, man. Yeah.
So Story.
Yeah.
Harmony Faith Schneider, which is interesting because obviously
Story, Harmony, Faith, Schneider.
Yeah. So as we talk about this, you know, the whole thing is a story.
It is a great story.
You know, and so it's funny. Story was a name that Candace had. You know, every woman has this. They've got that note on their phones with all the baby names that they think they like someday, and then eventually they sit down with their spouse to kind of talk through all that. And I remember my wife, like, she likes unique names a lot. Yeah. I'm probably a little bit more like, I think of the ways that kids might make fun of it.
Always.
Because I was that kid, and I was kind of a jerk.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
there was only a few that I had like really gravitated towards, and Story was one of them.
Yeah.
And it just became obvious through that whole process of what I shared that when we found out that Story was a girl, that was the name we wanted. I remember when I planned out like the gender reveal thing, you know, and I got that call. I left work early that day to go get balloons and all that other stuff. I hid the video camera in the living room to watch her reaction, and she knew that I knew and that I was going to tell her.
Sure.
But I just remember pretty vividly after just losing it when she found out it was a girl and telling her it's a baby girl, all this other stuff. Like there was just a confirmation between the two of us. Like it's Story.
Yeah.
Like we just knew. Like that's what it was. And so, but then her middle names, Harmony and Faith, those were names that Story's birth mom really loved and wanted for her daughter. Yeah. And so as we met with her leading up to Story being born, we told her, hey, we really want to honor you because what you're doing is a great gift to us. Something, you know, that we want to acknowledge that, but also we'd like to still have a part in choosing her name and Story. And so we talked to her about our heart behind that first name, and she loved that too because she also knew that making this adoption plan would be a part of her story as well, forever, not just leading up to Story being born. And so even if it was one of the hardest things she'd ever have to do to make an adoption plan and choose Candace and I to parent Story. And so, Story, Harmony, Faith. And
That's
so
awesome.
the two middle names doesn't always, you know, on birth certificates and things like that,
Right.
get a little longer paper and stuff like that on some of that. But she's 3 now, and she's
just had a birthday.
Just had a birthday, and so
You had a Wizard of Oz birthday too, right?
yeah, I don't know how we.
Did you have the Yellow Brick Road? The cake looked cool. I mean, I saw it on the the gram.
Oh, my wife.
So good, man.
I was just there.
She's good.
I was just there.
Candace is really good at it. So no, it was awesome, dude. Hey, just to step back from our stories for a second, adoption is really at the heart of God.
Yep.
This is. It's funny. I've done Fight Club now 9 times, and this is the first time I've said this to these guys. But I just said this a couple weeks ago. I said with them, if you were to tell me I had to explain the gospel in 2 words, I would say it's rescue story.
Yep.
If you said I need you to explain the gospel in 1 word, it's adoption.
Yep.
He chooses us. Yep. God had one son. His name is Jesus, and the rest of us get adopted into his family. He chooses us. He knows our story, everything about us, man, everything. And he goes, no, I'm coming.
Yep.
And that's so unbelievably powerful. Listen, I was an oops. I know I wasn't on purpose, but here's what's beautiful in this: God had a purpose for me. Yeah. And regardless of whatever I thought or whatever they thought, he goes, no, man, you have purpose, and I'm choosing you. Yeah. And that changes us. Couple verses that declare this. This is so good. And these are just verses as you're wrestling with adoption generally, just the term and how it relates to the gospel. But John 1:12 and 13, it says, but to all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. They are reborn, not with physical birth resulting from human passion or plan, but a birth that comes from God. Again, adoption's it's the gospel story. Yeah. Galatians 4:4-7. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. Because you are his sons. God sent the spirit of his son into our hearts, the spirit of the one who calls out, Abba, Father. Abba's just a word for daddy. So you're no longer a slave, and this is beautiful because I think we think that sometimes. Mm-hmm. But you're God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir, which means he's promised us something, which is really powerful and amazing. In Ephesians 4:1-6, it says, even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. God decided in advance. So he's just not limited by space and time. He decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus. That's the answer. He's the hero in the story. And this is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. He's not like, all right, I'll adopt him. He goes, no, man, I want you. And so we praise God for the glorious grace he has poured out on us, those who belong to his dear son. And then the last verse, you probably heard this in a bunch, and we use it out of the message often, 1 John 3:1, what marvelous love the Father has extended us. Just look at it. We're called children of God. That's who we really are. Adoption's super powerful, man. God chooses us, and where God calls, God's moving families to adopt children, to adopt is powerful as well. That calling can be a part of our story as well. And so As you think about your daughter and adoption, let's just grab those things. As you think about you all adopting Story, and then what's that taught you about just how God has adopted you and Candace?
Yeah, and honestly, her name is a good reminder of that too, because as much as I want to think that is her story for her life and things like that too, like thinking through those verses, and Ephesians 1:5 is something that's we've really gravitated towards in a lot of different ways. There's we've got some art that hangs in Story's room that has that like inscribed on it. It's just, that's all of our stories.
Right. It's the story.
And I think sometimes it goes back to like our misconceptions or what we were or weren't taught about adoption, that I think it's easy to try and remove ourselves from it.
Yeah.
Or think about it just as like a responsibility. No, that's a response to something God's already done for you.
That's right.
And it's one of those things, man. Anything when it comes to the kingdom, the good news of the gospel, man. If you receive it and don't share it, you're missing it.
Yeah.
And so
we should have to beg him to adopt us. He's inviting us.
Yeah. So that's one thing that comes to mind a lot. But another thing too is just like a really real reminder, because like I said, even though the call to adopt took me a while to get there, but it was something that was a really clear, distinct calling that was separate from our own like struggles with infertility and things like that too.
Right.
There were still like really hard seasons, even in the adoption process. Like I said, the dissolving of an agency doesn't just happen.
It's tough.
Dealing with all that stuff in the middle of a pandemic, and even still like families that were in our support group when we were going through all that, they're still waiting for placement 3+ years later. Like we're really, really blessed in the midst of that.
And not to we can even dig this out today, but the foster care system during COVID
was a mess.
Oh my gosh, man.
But a lot of those things, whether it's red tape, like bureaucracy, pandemics, all the other things that can kind of be around this like weirdness around it, it's just that it's been a really real reminder that even when God seems silent, it doesn't mean he's not working.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Like, and there's so many moments that can feel that way. And like I said, we were really unsure about if it was going to actually happen, but prayers were answered. And like I said, when we were learning about our own struggles with infertility, my prayers to God were often, God, help us become parents.
Yeah.
And help us start our family. And he answered those prayers.
Yeah.
It just, even if I struggled to see it because we weren't getting pregnant.
Yeah.
And so just helping to realize that even when God seems silent, it doesn't mean he's not working. And he usually is. And it's going to end up being such a great opportunity, lesson, and blessing in a way that we never really could imagine. So
we left here to go to Seattle to plant a church. And I thought that's the whole reason we were going to be there. And to be honest with you, I thought I'd live there for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'm going, there's a ton of lost people here. We have the good news. My whole life has been our whole story's been aimed toward this. I don't ever want to go back to the Midwest. I don't ever want to go back to the South. Guess what? Since then, I've done both of those things. But I thought it was just about this church plant. And 10 years before that, before we had our daughter, God, on that back porch, we talked about adoption for the first time, and God began to put that calling on us. And then, after that, my wife battled cancer. We got better. We walked through that. I lost my brother. And then we're getting on our feet, and then God calls us to go plant this church. And then, honestly, because it's so overwhelming, you're like starting a business, and it just kind of becomes a second child. We thought that probably would be it. And then we had a couple miscarriages. And I'm like, you know what? That's not fair to just that this church. I love the church, but I shouldn't take the place of. And so we went down this road, and we went down the road of infertility again. Actually, at first, and I was like, so we get there, and they're great. Like this person in Seattle is like one of the best in the country, but she's so straightforward with us. Listen, you guys are older in age. Your wife's older, and she's also a cancer survivor. So we're going to try, but we're not going to do this forever. And so when we left there, I thought, you know what? Wait. Let's go back to, hold on. Hey, babe, why don't we go back to what we felt like God was saying before we had our first child?
Yeah.
And we just took some time. And that's what he did. And that lady was great. And to be honest with you, we could have gone back down that road. But we just chose not to. Yeah. And man, we thought we thought we were here for that reason, to go plant this church, to plant Resonate Church. And that was part of it. But, man, he was trying to position us because in his sovereignty, he knows best for us. He knows what's best for Story. He knows what's best for Evie. Mm-hmm. He's got a purpose and a plan, man. Yep. He's just waiting on us to be available and but we don't even know it. I mean, again, you may be listening today. You go, I never even thought about this, and it's like just being available and seeing what God. We had forgotten about this calling to adopt, and then all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. He awakens it. I mean, I just baptized, my wife and I just baptized our daughter a couple weeks ago. Yep. And we got to tell her story. And dude, wait till that day happens.
It's one of the things I think I'm looking forward to it. But just know it's going to be a wild ride.
But I'm so blown away by these girls, man. I mean, it's one thing that they're born. It's beautiful, but man, when they're reborn, and I got to look at Evie and go, you have the best story, sweetheart. Yeah. God's fingerprints have been all over your life. I'm so proud of you. I can't even imagine a better kid. You are God's child. We love you with all that we are, but God loves you even more. And I can't wait to see how God's going to use your life. Mm. And then to hear her acknowledge, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, and to watch Sarah walk her through that, and then to get to baptize her into Christ. And she's a 6th grader.
That's so cool, man.
It's the best. It's the best. Hey, there's a resource for adopted families. There's probably a bunch of them. I always land with this one. There probably are better ones. Well, I shouldn't say that there are better ones. There may be other ones that are great too. But it's Russell D. Moore's book, Adopted for Life, and it's basically underneath it says the priority of adoption for church families and churches, Christian families and churches. This book is important because it's kind of 3 parts as you read this book. And again, if you're just wrestling with understanding adoption, or you're not sure that you're even supposed to do that, it's still a great book for it. It really helped us determine that this is what we were supposed to do. But it's about his family, their family's adoption experience with their boys in a Russian orphanage. They adopted, I think, 2 kids that year, and they weren't siblings. They became siblings. But then the second premise of the book is all about the doctrine of adoption, how God chooses to. For us to be a part of his forever family, which I think is awesome. And even if you read it for that, you're going to go, wow, I did not realize how important this word adoption is as it relates to salvation. Yeah. And then third, the importance of the church waking up to get in the game and follow God's heart through foster care and adoption. I think that's really important. There's an excerpt here that says that when we adopt and when we encourage a culture of adoption in our churches and communities, we're picturing something that's true about our God. We, like Jesus, see what the Father is doing, and we do likewise, John 5:19. And what our Father is doing, it turns out, is fighting for orphans, making them sons and daughters. That's super cool, man. I don't know if you have any other. Do you have any other resources that you would point people toward?
That one was really good for us as well. That was one that if you weren't going to say it, I was probably going to point people to Adopted for Life. Obviously, whether it's foster care, whether it's adoption, international through an agency, they're going to give you resources, and part of it is really just to make sure that you're equipped for what a life of parenting a child who's been through adoption, because it's a lot. There's going to be things to navigate through on a regular basis, and so there's a lot of really good resources. But also, you just got to be mindful too of there's a lot of resources out there that aren't really looking at it through the lens of the gospel or a biblical worldview, that there's some messy parts of that too. So using your brain a little bit. As far as resources go, that's probably how I'd lean into. But I would just, if I had a second, just to kind of share things, if there's families that are wrestling with adoption, I've talked about this a little bit, but try to learn. Try and learn and talk with people who've gone through it, not to assume that their experience is going to be yours, because it will be different. I just guarantee you that right now. But it is helpful to hear about all what people go through, so that way, there will be things that catch you off guard, but it will prepare you a little bit more in the midst of that. And then also
and if you're adopted family, don't be afraid to share this.
Yeah, you need to share your story.
Yep, you need to help people.
You need to as well, not just for other people, but also, and this is my soapbox, other people there might be other reasons why this might be the right choice for people's families or not, but I just know the identity issues that come in so many different ways around being adopted, what that means and stuff like that. I think how we can try and use the gospel is an opportunity to help our kids understand
Yeah.
why that was a part of their story as well.
Yeah.
I think it's going to help just in a lot of different ways and stuff. And that might be tougher if it's open versus closed, all those other things as well. But one other thing, just if you're trying to learn, man, do your research when it comes to choosing agencies.
Yeah.
Like if you go that route and you're not through the state or their foster care systems or things like that, because
And I'm not saying one way is better than another either.
no, and like I
Just do
said,
your
this is from my
research.
own experience too. But man, adoption, especially in our country, man, it's become a business.
Yeah.
And I wish it was easier. You know, you can't look at the fact of how great of a need there is, but why is that met with such like a hard? Why is it so hard for people to make themselves available to do that?
Yeah.
It's a whole nother conversation. But because it's a business, man, businesses need to make money to not only ensure that the adoption process is resourced the way it needs to be for the adoptive family and
Sure.
the birth family,
Sure.
but they got to keep their doors open.
Right.
And if you don't do your research,
Yeah.
that can lead to some not so awesome things as a part of that. Yeah. And so like just things to look for, questions to ask. Like I said, how do they advocate and offer care where applicable for the birth parents in the process and even after adoption has been finalized?
Yeah.
I think is something that's a big value for me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want to should on
Right.
anybody like you said,
Yeah.
and just remembering, man, the birth parents are the real heroes.
Yeah.
In that situation, and if they're being treated as a means to an end to accomplish the business model of adoption,
Yeah.
those are red flags to be aware of.
Yeah. We're not here to shit on anybody today.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge is have you ever thought about this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as we're trying to challenge people to be about the gospel, be about the things that God wants us to be about, to live our lives on mission, this just happens to land in our lives. And we look at a culture where, man, I mean, seriously, the amount of kids that are in foster care, just go Google that.
Yep.
The amount of kids that are waiting to be adopted. And if churches, if Christians, and I'm just going to say this, it sure would be awesome if Christians did it.
Yeah.
If we eradicated the orphan problem in our world.
Yeah.
I mean, raising up kids in a safe home, raising up kids with Christ in the center, but raising up Christians. You know, when people got to deal with identity, you can take them back to a real place, you know. And you know, you may be single, you may be a young adult, you may be going, man, but who knows what God, it's funny, you'll talk to people in their stories and you'll learn that, you know what, somebody, you know, some of these couples, before they ever even knew each other, like God put a calling on one of them they're like, hey, listen, I need you to know this before we get down the road. Yeah. This is what I feel like God's saying to me. Yeah. Even before they were married, you know. And so it's again, it might become, it might be that you're a foster family. It might be that you are someone who helps, you know, who walks down this road of adoption. You might be someone that just provides respite care for somebody who has adopted or somebody that's in a foster care family. Listen, I don't know what God's asking you to do. I just know that you should ask him and sit with him a minute and just ask the question. This is my favorite. I'm just going to say this. This is my favorite quote outside the script. This is my favorite quote of all time. And I heard we say it a couple years ago, and I immediately stuck it in my Fight Club stuff. And anytime I talk about identity, but this is what J.I. Packer says about the power of the gospel. This is my favorite quote of all time. It says, adoption is the highest privilege that the gospel offers, higher than justification. To be right with God, the judge, is a great thing, but to be loved and cared for by God the Father is even greater. Father is the Christian name for God, and our understanding of Christianity cannot be better than our grasp of adoption. That's J.I. Packer. I got one story, and then I'm going to wrap up, and you may have something too. But several years ago, probably 3 years ago, my kids are in bunk beds. And I've got an Emmy Lou, Catherine, who's got three names like your story, and I got an Everly Grace who's adopted, and Everly is on the top bunk, Emmy's on the bottom bunk, and we've tried to communicate her story along the way. She's 11; she understands her story as much as she can understand it as of this point. It's an open adoption, and so you know they filter in and out because they're kids. You know, they don't always remember it all. And so, you know, it's at bedtime, and bedtime's a hard time for us because our kids hate sleep for some reason. They hate it like it's sin. It's like, it's not, it's great, go do it, you know. And so And there are times where they're trying to, we talked about this where a kid's kind of, there's 19 steps when there's really only 3. It's like trying to bring a big old plane down.
Yeah.
And I walk in, and sometimes we end up, we'll throw a worship song on together, we'll read something, and we'll pray with them or whatever. But this night in particular, it kind of surprised me. Like, I walked in, and I'm just getting ready. It's like, I just want to get them done. I'm probably going to do something after this, get myself ready to go do something else or knock something out. And Emmy goes, "Hey, Dad, what's adoption?" And like in a half a second, I'm so protective of all of them, but also I don't want Evie to think her life is JV.
Yeah.
And so how do I explain something so simply to another, probably at the time 8-year-old, and also esteem the one that's on the top bunk who is adopted?
Yeah.
And so it's just about a half a second. And then Evie, who's just chill, man. She lived in Seattle for 4 months, but you would think that she grew up there her whole life. I mean, it's just this, man. It's just, we're kind of up and down, louder. She's just so chill. I love this kid. But she goes, I was getting ready to say something, and she goes, "Hey, Emmy, it means that God had a special plan for your life."
Wow. She was 8 at that time?
Yeah. And I'm like, "Babe," and I'm like high-fiving her. I'm like, "High five, that's so awesome." She gets it.
Yeah.
And then Emmy goes, "What about me?" I'm like, no, hold on. And then I just tell the story of all 3 of them being born.
Man.
But it's not primary and secondary.
Yeah.
It's not varsity and JV. They just have great stories.
Man, that's cool. I'm even thinking through, like I said, we've got pictures that hang in Story's room of like our visits, because we have an open adoption as well. So we've got, pictures, of our meetings or pictures in the hospital and stuff like that. And it's even cool hearing her start to comprehend a little bit of just that relationship first and foremost, that her birth mom, like she calls her by name, and all these other things too, that there's recognition of that as a person she has a deep connection with, even if it's somebody she only sees right now like once a year. It's about how often we visit. And things like that. And I'll be interested to see like how we get to shepherd her and just our families, like collectively our family and her family, because we're connected as a family with her and our birth parents too. Kind of shepherd her through that as she gets older, and understand there's going to be ebbs and flows with that as well. But it's really hopeful to me to hear that too, just in thinking through what's that going to look like is, because she's starting to ask more questions and just about everything, but to really hopefully just help her understand that is her story.
And I'm not saying that identity issues don't exist with people that are adopted, but I will tell you identity issues is an area for all people.
For sure.
Family of origins are issues for all people too, and so it's going, how do you handle that? You try to figure out the right way to normalize it, and you have the right conversations, and you give them what they can have as they're ready to receive it, Before we wrap up, there's a couple resources right here in Central Kentucky, and if you're listening to this outside of that, then you'll have to go check some things out. But for us, we have All God's Children, and this is going to be on the screen and in the show notes. But basically, their website is in the show notes. The contact is Carl Smith, Kate Maupin, and Jonathan Smith. All God's Children is a local campus partner that we have with our Nicholasville campus. We have a lot of their staff attend our church. It's a great resource for us that you should check out if you're even wrestling with adoption or foster care. And then Orphan Care Alliance is also another partner of ours, and you'll see their information again in the show notes. But they're a central partner, which means all of our campuses leverage them. But they have a vision for the body of Christ, the church, to lead the efforts of caring for foster and adoptive communities in Kentucky and Southern Indiana. And what's cool, I was asking some questions before this podcast, was that there is also a place on their website where you can sign up to subscribe for something called OCA's Gateway Program. And all this is you receive just updates on how they're doing, and then also sometimes specific needs. And so you may be going, I'm not sure if I'm called to do this, but they may just highlight 3 needs from a week that, hey, there's a family, they need this, they're fostering. And so you may be able to meet those needs right then in a click through, Venmo, or you may have something or whatever. And so this is where it's just learning more, getting understanding. Again, neither of us grew up knowing that much about this, but I'm so glad that I'm down this road. I'm so glad that I get to go home today and I get to look at this little girl with these beautiful eyes and get to see God, continue to work in her life. And I'm blessed, man. We're not heroes for doing it.
Nope.
Just trying to be obedient. Again, it's not JV. If you have biological kids, you better raise them right.
Yep.
You better put them underneath the authority and instruction of the Lord. You better figure out how to do that in the right way. And if they're adopted, you do the same,
Yep.
man. But super encouraged by that. Anything that you want to share to close this, man? We've been hammering today. These are 2 in a row that are hard. So.
Yeah. No, I just think I'm just reminded of God's goodness.
Yeah.
Like that's the one thing that adoption really has reminded me of. But even in the midst of just it is hard.
Yeah.
I'll never not say that.
Yeah.
And even when you think you're kind of like through like a valley type season of what adoption and just parenting in general looks like, and I'm still learning a lot about parenting.
Right.
God is near.
Yeah.
And he sees you.
Yeah.
And I also I think you're hearing my heart in this too, is that it's really easy to allow yourself to think one-sided in that equation.
Yeah.
But God sees birth parents.
Sees it all. Yeah.
And sees the people who make that decision as well. And I think there's a special spot in the part of the Beatitudes that didn't get written down about birth moms as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
thanks for sharing your story, buddy. I love it. I love what God's doing in yours and Candace's life. It's cool to, I get to bounce around to campuses, but a lot of times we both kind of spend a little bit more time at Lexington just because of proximity. Yep. But it's cool to see your kiddo running around. I've watched her just try to pound some dinner before meetings and stuff like that. It's fun to get to see her grow. So 2 words, adoption's awesome. If this podcast has encouraged you, I'd love to hear from you. If you're wrestling with something like this, there's plenty of people on our staff, but Eric and I would be happy to either talk with you or connect you with other people. If that's something that you're interested in doing, you can shoot us an email at lockerroom@southland.church. As always, if this podcast has encouraged you, man, there may be somebody in your life that needs it, and so feel free to share that. But get after it, man. Go lead out, fight for the most important things. We'll catch you next time on Locker Room.